A word so simple it has just two letters, a word your grandmother says, your phone understands, and people on the other side of the planet recognize instantly. Okay is probably the most widely understood word in human history. And it started as a joke, a bad spelling joke, printed in a Boston newspaper in 1839 that absolutely nobody was supposed to remember. Here is how a typo on purpose became the universal language of the human race. To understand okay, you have to understand 1830s America. The country was young, cities were growing fast, and newspapers were everywhere. Boston, New York, and Philadelphia were in a constant cultural competition, trading jokes, slang, and gossip through their daily papers. And in the late 1830s, one particular craze was sweeping literate American society. Abbreviations. Not practical abbreviations, but jokey ones. Writers and editors would take common phrases, deliberately misspell them, and then abbreviate the misspelled version. It was absurdist humor for the educated class, the kind of thing that would get a knowing laugh from anyone who was in on the gag. So you had things like NC for enough said, written as if it were spelled enough CD. You had KG for no good, because if you spelled it no good, the initials would be KG, and you had KY for no use from no use. These abbreviations appeared in papers, in letters, in conversation among people who thought of themselves as witty. Most of them vanished completely, except one. March 23, 1839, Boston, Massachusetts. The Boston Morning Post publishes a small, humorous article. Inside it, almost as a throwaway gag, appears the abbreviation OK, defined as standing for all correct, a deliberately bad spelling of all correct. The writer was Charles Gordon Green, the editor of the paper. Green was known for exactly this kind of playful, self-aware humor. He was not trying to coin a phrase for the ages. He was making an inside joke for his readers, the kind of winking abbreviation game that educated Bostonians had been enjoying for a couple of years. He almost certainly expected it to disappear within weeks like all the others, and for a little while, it did seem to fade. But then, something happened that nobody could have predicted: the 1840 United States presidential election. This was not a quiet election. This was one of the most raucous, symbol-driven, slogan-heavy campaigns in American history. William Henry Harrison, the Whig candidate, ran under the famous slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. But Martin Van Buren, the Democratic incumbent, had a nickname that was about to accidentally save a dying piece of slang. Van Buren was from Kinderhook, New York. His supporters called him Old Kinderhook, and they organized Democratic clubs under the name the OK Club, where OK stood for Old Kinderhook. These clubs held rallies. They put the letters on banners. They chanted them. Suddenly, OK was not a private Boston newspaper joke anymore. It was a political rallying cry being shouted across the country by thousands of people, printed on pamphlets, repeated in rival newspapers, some of them mocking it, some celebrating it, but all of them spreading it. The historian Alan Walker Read spent decades tracing the true origin of OK, publishing his findings in the journal American Speech in 1963 and 1964. Read was the scholar who definitively connected the Boston Morning Post origin to the broader spread through the 1840 election. Before his research, the word's history was genuinely murky, and competing origin stories had filled the vacuum. Read's work gave us the timeline we now consider authoritative. One small joke in a Boston paper. One presidential election. One nickname for a candidate from a town in New York. And the word was launched. Here is where most people stop the story, and that stopping point actually creates a misconception. People hear, it came from all correct, and assume the word succeeded because of the joke itself, because it was clever, because all correct was funny enough to stick. But that is not quite right. Dozens of abbreviations from the exact same joke tradition were just as clever. KG for no good is no less absurd than OK for all correct. NC for nuff CE had been circulating just as widely. They all vanished. The reason OK survived was not the joke. It was the accident. The accident of a presidential candidate from Kinderhook whose initials happened to match a dying piece of slang. The word was rescued by coincidence, turbocharged by a national election, and then it was simply too widespread to forget. The pattern of a word surviving because of accidental reinforcement is something we see play out constantly in modern language. Think about how many internet abbreviations from the early 2000s are completely forgotten now, while a handful, like LOL, became part of global vocabulary. The mechanism is identical. Most slang dies. Occasionally, something gets picked up by a massive cultural moment and achieves escape velocity. OK itself continues to evolve. In digital communication, the spelling OK has become the warmer, more considered version, while a bare OK or K can feel terse or dismissive. The word has developed an entire emotional spectrum that did not exist when Charles Gordon Green typed it as a throwaway gag. People now analyze whether someone responded with OK versus K and draw significant conclusions from the difference. What makes OK genuinely remarkable is not just that it survived, it is how completely it escaped its English language origin. OK is used in French, Japanese, Arabic, Swahili, Russian, and Hindi, often without translation, often without anyone knowing or caring where it came from. Linguists call these loanwords, but OK has crossed so many linguistic boundaries that it functions less like a borrowed word and more like a universal signal. Part of its power is phonetic. O and K together produce a sound that is easy to say in almost any language. There are no difficult consonant clusters, no tones that shift the meaning, no letters that do not exist in other alphabets. The word is almost suspiciously easy to pronounce everywhere on Earth. That is not something its inventor planned. It is just luck. It also sits in a grammatical sweet spot. OK can be a noun, an adjective, a verb, an adverb, and an interjection. Give me the OK is a noun. That is OK with me is an adjective. Did you OK that decision is a verb. She did OK on the test is an adverb. OK, let us go is an interjection. Very few words in any language do that much work simultaneously. That flexibility, combined with its ease of pronunciation, is likely why it colonized so many other languages so completely. And the original spirit of the word, a little bit of lightness, a confirmation that things are acceptable if not perfect, that spirit has survived intact for 185 years. When you say, OK, you are participating in a chain that goes back to a newspaper joke, a political rally in New York, and a scholar sitting in an archive in the 1960s who finally figured out where all of it began. If the accidental survival of a two-letter joke across 2 centuries is the kind of story that does something to your brain, subscribe, because that is all we do here. Next time, we are looking at a word so old it appears in texts written before the Roman Empire, a word you probably use today without realizing it came from a language that has been dead for 1,000 years.